A man chooses to exact his Christmas revenge with a homemade flamethrower, but it doesn't go nearly as well as he planned. This man right here is Bruce Jeffrey Pardo. Bruce lived in the San Fernando Valley area of California. On the surface, at least, he was doing really well in life. He was a graduate of California State University, and he had a pretty good job at ITT Electrical Systems, with radar systems. In 2004, Bruce met a woman that he fell for, hard. Her name was Sylvia Orza. They dated for a while and soon got married in January of 2006. However, the marriage began to sour pretty quickly and they started growing apart. Sylvia wasn't too happy with how Bruce was acting in their marriage. For example, Bruce refused to open a joint bank account with her and expected her to use her own finances to pay for pretty much everything to do with all 3 of her kids. Eventually, pretty quickly, in June of 2008, it was decided that there would be a divorce. The divorce ended up going pretty heavily in Sylvia's favor. The courts ordered Bruce to pay $1,785 a month to Sylvia in spousal support. Bruce was very unhappy with the way things were turning out, telling a friend that his wife was taking him to the cleaners. Just 1 month later in July, Bruce got fired from his job. It was found that he was billing clients for hours that he hadn't actually been working. Due to this, the courts did at least suspend his support payments for the time being. As part of the divorce settlement, Bruce was also required to pay Sylvia a flat sum of $10,000. Sylvia kept the wedding rings and she kept their dog. Bruce complained to the courts that Sylvia wasn't going through any sort of hardship. She was living with her parents, rent-free, bought a new luxury car, regularly went on gambling trips to Vegas, ate out at nice restaurants, and frequently received massages and attended golf courses. Do keep in mind that, on the contrary, Sylvia's friends assert that this was not the case at all. It came to be known that one big deciding factor in this divorce was the fact that Bruce had been concealing a child from a previous marriage. That child had been severely injured in a swimming pool accident years prior and likely required constant medical care. Not only did he not support this child at all, he completely cut off his ex-wife and her children. Bruce may have been a tad bit shady, especially when being fired from his job for fraudulent billing, and his whole bailing on his previous marriage and child, but he had no criminal record whatsoever. He had no history of violence either. However, this divorce absolutely shattered Bruce. It changed him. His vendetta with Sylvia became all he could think about. He didn't only want to get rid of her, he wanted to get rid of her entire world. He wanted to end everything she loved and cared about. Then came the fatal night of December 24th, 2008, Christmas Eve. The Ortega family, Sylvia's extended family, invited their whole family over to their home in Covina, California. Covina was actually known as being a nicer area outside of LA with a much lower crime rate, a good place for family. The Ortega family loved Christmas. It was their favorite time of year to gather up the family, mainly their 2 older sons, James and Charles, and their daughters, Letitia, Alicia, and Sylvia. On Christmas Eve, the older members of the family were playing a lively game of poker in the front room. The energy was good, and everyone was having a good time. Some of the younger members of the family were hanging out in the back of the house, some were out back by the pool, and a few were playing video games on a PC upstairs. Altogether, there were about 25 people at the house. The doorbell rang. The family, assuming it was one more guest to join the festivities, allowed 8-year-old Katrina, the daughter of Letitia, to go open the door. She happily ran toward the door to greet the next guest. But what actually came next was absolutely not what anyone could have anticipated. At around 11:30 p.m., the door opened to reveal Bruce Pardo, dressed in a complete Santa suit, carrying a huge gift-wrapped package, which, inside, contained all of the elements of his revenge. Katrina happily yelled out, "Santa Claus, Santa Claus, when Bruce reached into his package to pull out a 9mm handgun. He immediately shot her in the face. The bullet struck the side of her jaw, likely because she quickly turned her head at the last second. She collapsed to the ground. The shots continued, and 2 of her uncles also fell to the ground, wounded. The family members who were playing poker, including Sylvia, hid under the kitchen table, but it didn't provide much cover at all. Bruce was firing indiscriminately. He didn't really have a specific target. He wanted to eliminate everything, everyone. Sylvia, her whole family, all of her friends, everyone. He stood over and executed several of the victims. The adults, being at the front of the home, were much more vulnerable in the attack as they were immediately visible and had no time to run or hide. "It's Bruce," yelled one person at the party, recognizing him. The family was fully aware of who was attacking them as they died, one by one. Several of the wounded family members tried to get up and grab Bruce, despite being gravely injured. However, despite all the struggling, they just simply didn't have the strength to take him down. Katrina, despite being shot in the face, stood up and staggered out of the house. Seeing this, her mother Letitia made a break for it and sprinted out of the house as well, shocked that her daughter was even alive at all. Some of the other adults were able to grab some of the children and carry them out of the home. Virtually all of the younger people were safe as they were in the back of the house and weren't immediately seen when Bruce opened fire. Satisfied that he had shot enough of them, Bruce stopped to open the rest of his gift-wrap package. From it, he pulled out a compressor and used it to spray gasoline all over the house and catch it on fire. However, Bruce made a huge mistake. He didn't realize that there was already an open flame somewhere in the house, possibly a candle or a stovetop. It led to a massive explosion that he wasn't ready for. Bruce had also brought a device he made himself that was capable of quickly engulfing the entire house in flames. He and this device were caught in the explosion, leaving him horrifically burned. Unfortunately, this explosion also resulted in the only death of a minor throughout the incident as well. Michael Ortiz, who was playing on the computer upstairs, ended up passing away. His mother didn't make it out either. Bruce then took off his Santa costume, changed back into his street clothes, and got into his car. He escaped. 9 people died in the attack, either from gunfire or flames or a combination of both. Sylvia had died early on in the mayhem. Her mother, father, 2 brothers, and her sister died as well, along with 3 other family members. 3 others were wounded. Katrina survived her gunshot to the face. The injury was severe, but ultimately not life-threatening. A 16-year-old girl was merely wounded by a shot to the back, and a 20-year-old woman injured her ankle by jumping from a 2nd-story window to escape. Several people escaped from the home, and many of them made calls to the police as quickly as they could. One survivor even called during the attack itself. Shortly after, the home erupted into 50-foot-tall flames, engulfing the entire house and clearly visible from all throughout the neighborhood and even more. Neighbors from all over were calling in to the police, including one who had the insight to see that the fire was deliberately set, likely having heard the gunshots before. "Come immediately, they're burning down someone's house," she said. The scene was absolute chaos. The fire took firefighters over an hour and a half to extinguish. By this time, the only way to identify the victims was from dental and medical records. Now, Bruce may have escaped the scene, but he didn't get away with it. It seems in hindsight that Bruce had planned to escape after the incident, but this was severely hindered by the brand new 3rd-degree burns covering his arms. He had planned to get into his car and drive off to kill Sylvia's attorney next, but it's likely that he was in such extreme pain that even operating the steering wheel was an excruciating task. Much of his Santa costume had actually melted and adhered to his skin, becoming impossible to remove and causing him immense pain. After killing the attorney, he had planned to fly out to Illinois. He had recently told a high school friend that he was planning to visit. It's debated on whether or not this trip was a ruse to fool investigators. It's speculated that he had actually planned to flee to Mexico, which would have made much more sense, and that buying this ticket to Illinois was mainly to throw them off long enough for him to do so. However, in his extreme pain, it seems that he no longer felt that he was up to escaping. He drove 40 miles to his brother's house. His brother was not home. He then entered the home, put the gun in his mouth, and ended his life. Amidst the chaos, police were called out to the home of Bruce's brother. He had returned home from a Christmas party to find his brother dead on the ground. When they arrived, police found a single shot from a 9mm handgun in his head, a hole in the ceiling above, a handgun in his lap, and another on the floor next to him. The situation seemed obvious, but at the moment they couldn't ignore the possibility of a second shooter that had turned on Bruce. One day later on Christmas, police interviewed Letitia, who was immediately able to identify the shooter, her sister's ex-husband, Bruce Pardo. Hearing this, police went back to Bruce's brother's home to search his car, which was a car that was reported by neighbors to have been at the scene of the murders. Inside, they found the charred remains of a Santa suit. There was also a computer, clothes, water, food, and maps of both the US and Mexico. They then searched the brothers' home once again. They found $17,000 shrink wrap to one of Bruce's legs. They also found 4 13-round capacity handguns that were completely emptied out, but also found about 200 rounds of extra ammunition lying around. Due to some of the gear seen in the car, it was thought that calling the bomb squad in might be the best thing to do before proceeding. While they were investigating, a portion of the Santa suit actually caught on fire once again, starting a blaze that soon engulfed the whole car, destroying it. A homemade bomb had been left in the car, under the suit. Searching Bruce's own home, they found 5 empty handgun boxes, a tactical shotgun, and a container for gasoline. They said his home was a virtual bomb factory. They dropped their assumption that a second killer was involved. It was growing ever more clear that Bruce had done this, and that he was already long gone. 3 of the victims had died purely from gunshot wounds. 4 more died of a combination of gunshot wounds and fire. 2 more deaths were purely from the fire alone. 13 children were left as orphans after the incident, with several more losing one parent. Police, and many others, assumed that the motive behind the attack was Bruce's nasty divorce. It's also widely believed that he didn't originally intend to end his own life, and he simply did so because he felt no choice after the terrible injuries he suffered. He left no notes, no video, no recording, nothing to explain any of this any further. He wanted to kill everyone, even his own mom. A monster. A monster. That man was a monster. He killed good, hard-working people who had many friends and who loved the United States, said Chapta Ortega, one of the survivors. The home was demolished and remained an empty lot, a grim reminder of what once occurred there for many years, up until a new home was built there in 2018, 10 years after the attack. Seeing the neighborhood now, you'd never know anything was amiss. So once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, a like is always really appreciated. Go ahead and subscribe if you like dark content like this. It's mainly what I do. And if you'd like to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon page linked in the description below. Speaking of which, shout out to my top patrons: Arctic Cat, Alan Damiani, Adrian Lawley, Matthew Damateo, Murray Joel Sanchez, David McLaughlin, Marsh, Buffazerk, Lonro, Jewel Movchan, Lori Tayaba, Kim Peak, Lux Alpaca, Charity, Skooky Main, Foxlicity, Jackie, Lavender Wise, and Teresa Ferguson. As always, you are the best. Thank you, good night.